there. So I guess y'all heard all about me pretty much. I've been working with students with disabilities, first at community college level and now at the University of Rhode Island. I'm also finishing up my PhD in school psychology. Initially when I started my education, I thought that I was going to want to work with very small children, 7, 6 years old, and kind of help them with learning disability issues and things along those lines. And discovered quickly that I don't really have the temperament for working with small people, which much to my chagrin, I was already 2 years into my program and needed to reevaluate. So I kind of happened upon a job at the community college because I had some bills to pay, and discovered how much I really love working with college population. So really working with students, working through their college degrees, an associate's, bachelor's. I have graduate students on my caseload, has been really rewarding because they all have so many different goals and dreams, and really having someone be able to work towards those and helping them do that, and helping them with the many roadblocks that can come up. And I've had several come up in my graduate career, and so I'm, I think, even more sympathetic perhaps than I might have been otherwise. So I think that's kind of my background and what got me interested in working with students with disabilities. This year I'm finishing my PhD, like I said, and so I'm doing an internship. So I'm half-time at the University of Rhode Island and I'm half-time at the high school level. And it's really been interesting to see what students are like the year before they start college, because there's not that big a difference in that 6 months of time. And so it's been interesting to kind of look at the supports that they get in high school and recognize how different those really are from the supports that there are at the University of Rhode Island and pretty much any other post-secondary institution. And so I want to talk a little bit about some of the differences between high school and college, the supports that are available in high school versus in college. And then really I wanted to kind of open it up to you all and see if you all had any specific questions or things that you had interest in. I just wrote my dissertation on transition for students with disabilities, and so I can talk about it like all day. But it might get boring, so I want to avoid some of that. But there were some interesting findings that maybe you all would be interested to hear as well. So I think the biggest difference really is the structure of high school is very structured. So you go to school most of the time 7 to 3. Your teachers follow up with you. You are reminded about assignments, you're given chances to turn assignments in. There's so much support in high school, and it's all in one building. At URI, we have many of the same supports, but they're kind of spread out across campus. So our Office Disability Services works specifically for the academic accommodations. And so what we do is we work with students who need something in their classes. So if they need extra time for exams, if they need the ability to reschedule exams because they have a flare-up or they have an issue that's related to their health or their disabling condition, we work with students to be able to reschedule exams or assignments based on that. But we don't do tutoring, we don't do counseling. Those are all separate buildings. I'm kind of a triage center though. I get the most random requests and emails from students. How do I find, I can't even remember, there was one this week that was very bizarre, but we worked it through. But kind of how do I find a tutor? How do I change my room? How do I get in touch with housing or the counseling center? I'm allergic to like half the things under the sun. How do I talk to someone and find out what I can eat in the dining halls? So we kind of work with students to access all of those folks on campus, and we work closely with those folks to figure out how to refer students out, even if we aren't necessarily the people who can provide those services for them. So the other big piece of the college education is just the accommodations that are available to students are very different. In high school, they're allowed to modify curriculums, they're allowed to modify exams, assignments, they're allowed to reduce course loads for students or reduce the amount of work that students are needing to do to pass a class. In college, that's no longer going to be appropriate. And so for students coming into college who had a lot of modifications in high school, who had, 75% of the questions on an exam, or if they only had to write 2/3 of the paper that everyone else was required to write, sometimes they come into college and really struggle with understanding that that's not acceptable at the college level, that's not really appropriate. My goal is for any of my students, when they leave URI with a diploma that says URI on it, it's the exact same as any other diploma. So, and likewise, the Office of Disability Services, we usually don't know about students until after they've been admitted and made the decision to come to University of Rhode Island. So we don't have anything to do with the admissions process. We don't really have anything to do with that until after students are enrolled. And so they meet all the same requirements. A lot of people kind of have this misconception that students with disabilities are less capable. They have a different application process. That's not at all the case for any institution that I've worked with. So that's good news, is that the high standards are kind of held across the board. So living on campus is obviously another huge piece to the college transition. Many students still choose, especially in Rhode Island, this kind of quirky little state. I didn't grow up here, and so I moved here from Oregon. And so coming here from Oregon was a very different experience because especially I live down in South County. And I was like, what do you mean you don't want to drive to Providence for dinner? It's only 40 minutes. But now I will not go to Warwick for dinner. This is like a crazy expedition for me to get here today. So especially coming here. But I digress. Many students will opt to kind of commute from home, even if it's a little bit further, and stay living with their parents. And we can work with students on those sorts of things. But the residence hall situation at URI is a little cozy this year. A majority of our freshmen are housed in triple rooms, which are about the size of probably the closets that they're used to at home. And so that's something we've been working a lot with students. You know, if for a disability reason they need housing accommodations, we work with them over the summer to make sure that they have what they need. If they come to campus and realize that it's not what they need, we work with them. We have a great housing department on campus, and they're so flexible and willing to kind of bend over backwards and make sure students have what they need. And so that's kind of the big residential education piece. But it is kind of an irreplaceable time of college. You know, the first year of college is a really big deal, and moving away from home and doing that along with all of your other fellow first-year students. And so even if students are a little bit on the fence about whether or not they want to live on campus, I encourage them to try it for at least a semester, knowing that they can always kind of move back home, because there's never going to be another time when you're moving onto campus with a whole bunch of other people who are also doing that for the first time. And so I had a couple students who were on the fence last summer, and I said, well, why don't you just try it and see how it works? We can get you a single room. So really working to make sure that they have access to that experience was important to me. To make sure, and for one of them it turned out really well for one of them, but I think it was important to kind of know and understand that. So the biggest change for most of my students that I see is the amount of self-advocacy that's required on their part. And for parents, what I see is relinquishing that advocacy piece to their students. For many parents, they've been their child's primary advocate for the first 12 years of their education. And it's a really big deal to kind of give that up to your child and allow them to kind of speak up for themselves and let either the professors or our office or let someone know what it is that they need. And so we work on that. You know, I have a lot of parents who are still calling. It's only October, so I have a lot of parents that I'm still hearing from. Usually by like April of next year, they'll have kind of turned things over. I have a sophomore this year. I was like, wow, I haven't heard from your mom in like a year. So that was really exciting. But he's doing a really nice job. He's doing a really good job. He came to see me. He had some questions, and so he's really able to kind of speak up and look out for what he needs. But I understand it's kind of scary for parents, and we try to be really supportive of that transition for parents, but also really supportive of the students and helping them understand, you know, how to explain what they need, how to speak with their professors, or how to speak with their roommates, or you know how it is that they can self-identify. For students with a chronic health condition, I usually do recommend that they at least let someone in their residence halls, like their RAs and the residence hall staff who's kind of overseeing the residence hall. I do usually recommend that they let them know that there's a health condition going on. I don't always recommend that depending on some of my students with more mental health issues. It's kind of more touchy, and they get really self-conscious if there's mental health issues that they don't feel they should have to share. But sometimes it's helpful, especially in terms of a safety aspect for my students with physical health disabilities, to let people know. And I hate to say it because it shouldn't be this way, but even professors tend to be a little bit more understanding of a student with a physical health condition as opposed to a mental health condition. So a professor can really easily understand and kind of wrap their brains around someone with, you know, a disabling physical condition, which is keeping them from getting to class or from completing their exam, much more so than a disabling mental health condition. So we're working to change that, but for the time being, that is the way it stands. And so, but I think that it is important to kind of let people know, to the extent that you're comfortable, what it is that might be impacting your ability to come to school. So one of the most common accommodations that we do for students who have more physical health conditions that might cause variations in attendance or the ability to get to school is we allow them to take below 12 credits and still be considered full-time. So normally, in order to be eligible for financial aid or live on campus, students are required to carry a full-time course load. And so usually that's 12 credits or 4 classes. But what we do is we allow them to take below that level if that's what they need to be successful, but still be eligible for financial aid, still be able to live in the residence halls, and all of those kind of key pieces of the college experience. So I'd say that's kind of one of the more, not hidden, but less well-known things that our office does. And so a lot of students are like, oh, I didn't know that I could go below full-time. So we work with them on that. And then our carrot to get students to come see us every semester is we put them in for priority registration. So what that means is they register on the first day that registration opens. So at URI, it's all based on the number of credits you have. So as an incoming freshman, you have 0 credits. And so you go in on the last day, which is like November 17th or 18th or something, which is a full month after everyone else will already be in. So in order to kind of help students structure a schedule that's going to be helpful for them, and every one of my students has different rationales and different things they like. Some of them like back-to-back classes so that they don't skip any, and then some of them like, you know, little breaks in between classes to kind of regroup or go over their notes or take a little break, and so on. But whatever it is that works for our students, we help them at least get in early enough to have access to that priority registration piece. Who would qualify under the ADA as having a disability. And so really what we look for in terms of documentation is a letter from a treating physician. And so we look for them for the diagnosis because honestly, I'd never heard of Ehlers-Danlos before I spoke to Ellen on the phone. And we have a lot of students with conditions similarly rare, but equally, you know, impactful in their lives. And so it's really helpful for us to have the physicians kind of explain what that means. And so not just, you know, they have this condition, but what it means and what it might mean in terms of a student's ability to participate in classes or come to campus or take exams. Do they need more time? And so it's helpful sometimes for the medical physician to let us know what that might mean in terms of accommodations. Usually I found, especially my students with physical health disabilities, they're the most knowledgeable people. And so when we first meet, kind of go through a intake process and talk about what's been helpful in the past, how might that look different in college, how might that be different on a bigger campus, you know, mobility-wise. Sometimes our campus, it's all uphill, basically. And so if you start at the top of the hill, that's great, but then if you need to kind of go down the hill, come back up, some of our students find that to be tricky. So we do have a RAM van on campus that students, we call it the RAM van because we're the Rams, but it's a handy van basically. And so we have a van that students can sign up for at the start of the semester. They'll have the driver's schedule or the driver's cell phone, and the drivers will have their schedule, and they'll have scheduled rides throughout the semester. And so you can't get kicked off, but that's only if you like don't show up and don't call to let them know. But our drivers are fantastic. They usually see far more of my students than I do, and they have a really nice relationship with the students. And so, especially in January, URI is terrible at clearing the sidewalks. I think most of Rhode Island I found is terrible at clearing the sidewalks. But URI, I feel like there's a lot of ice and things like that. And so we do work with students to at least make sure they can get to their classes and get what they need. And so we do have some buildings that are not ADA accessible. Basically, as URI gets permits to renovate buildings, they come up to ADA compliance. But there are still like probably 4 or 5 buildings on campus that there's one washburn which has 3 floors, it's all stairs, and there's actually stairs to get into the first floor. So, but what we do is for all of our students with issues like that, we go through all of their schedules prior to the start of the semester, and we'll change rooms. And so, so we talk with the people who are in charge of scheduling campus-wide, and and housing, we do the same. We make sure that they're in a first floor or accessible room. So, and so that's another Rhode Island State institution. But I think it's pretty common for many universities to have something similar to allow students. It's not, you know, magical, and you'll still only get financially for the number of credits that you're taking. So it's prorated based on that. But certainly we have at URI, we have what's called a Centennial Scholarship. So it's merit based. You have to keep a 3.0 to keep it, but you're also supposed to stay full time. And so we work with the Centennial Committee to make sure that our students don't lose eligibility for that if they need to take 9 credits per semester. So, but as far as I know, it's a pretty common information.
Yeah. As a student, let's say I was a senior in high school, about to attend the college, and I have a disability, but on my application, there's nothing there that's telling me this. Is it my responsibility to get in touch with who, and when do you recommend that I make that contact to get the help I need to be able to enter that class?
Yep, so it would be your responsibility to get the documentation probably to the Office of Disability Services or whatever similar office is at that institution. We see a lot of students kind of around welcome days, which are in April. Usually May 1st is the decision deadline for many schools, and so we do a lot of intake appointments. We'll sit down for an hour with a student and their families before they've even made a decision, just to talk about what's available, what might be helpful, and so we do sit down with them to help them make that decision, because every campus is a little bit different in terms of what's available and what might be a good fit, what majors are available, and so a lot of students will kind of pick and choose, you know, their top 3 and then go do a more involved campus tour, meet with disability services, meet with someone from their major, meet with an advisor, and kind of make a more informed decision that way. Yeah.
How do the kids, do most of the kids make it through, you know, with the emotional strain of being away and having to school and stuff like that?
You know, I would say we have a comparable attrition rate in the Office of Disability Services as compared to the regular, you know, student body. I think what I tell all of my first year students, because when they meet with their advisors in orientation in June, they pick their schedules for the fall. But those advisors aren't always well versed in issues of disability or issues of registering for classes and things like that. And so I'll see a lot of students kind of towards the end of the summer, and they'll be registered for like 17 credits. And I'm like, wow, okay, let's talk about this and how this is probably not a great plan for you. But it is kind of par for the course for incoming students to be registered for 16 or 17 credits. And so I'll usually say, go to your first week of classes and then pick one of those classes to drop. So you can kind of get a feel for the professor, what the course is going to be like, but then kind of reduce yourself to a more manageable course load. Because in that first semester of college, it's not just the academic pieces that you're learning. You're learning how to study like a college student, you're learning how to structure your time. You know, high school kids are in classes 7 hours a day. College students have maybe 15 hours of class a week, so they'll look at their schedule and be like, look at all that free time, it's great. You know, I have like 15 hours of class a week and then all this free time. But that's really kind of unstructured time that you're supposed to be going to office hours and tutoring and doing reading and all of those things. And so helping students learn how to structure that time is a huge piece of their transition during that first semester. And so I tell lots of my students, like, the most important things you learn won't be in the classroom your first semester. It's going to be more about how to be a college student, how to succeed on campus, and how to fit in and feel comfortable in your dorm and away from home and all of those pieces.
They live in the same dorm, or they spread out for the general population?
We get that a lot. So sometimes people ask if we house students together, but for a student with like organizational problems, say, having 3 of those students in a closet-sized room is probably a terrible, terrible plan. This person really understands my anxiety. I have anxiety too, so let's live together and that will be a good fit. But for the most part, it's arbitrary, except for, you know, if they need a room on the first floor for accessibility purposes or things like that, we'll ask for that from housing. But other than that, we don't really have a say in terms of like who they live with. are enrolled in URI 101 across campus, and so that's a pretty small, it's usually around 15 students, once a week course that's designed to help them acclimate to school and learn more about URI and the campus as a whole. Our office doesn't have well, we have support groups more for kind of students with poor social skills on the spectrum and that sort of thing. Is usually who we meet with more regularly in a small group setting. We're working on starting an Active Minds chapter, and that's kind of a nationwide mental health advocacy group they do some really cool things in terms of awareness and destigmatization of mental health disabilities. And so that's the next piece. Certainly if we had students who are interested, lots of times student groups can be hard because what happens is you'll have a couple of really involved students and really gung-ho. We used to have a group, it was called SMAC, it was for Students for a More Accessible Campus. Mm-hmm. And so they had some really great, really involved people, and they all graduated. And then there was nobody there. They hadn't really been grooming anyone to take their place, and so it was kind of one of our students and some of her close friends. And then, but then they never really kind of recruited younger students to kind of come on board, and so that kind of dissolved. I still have a jar of donations in my office. We serve as advisors in any number of capacities, and so it may be either our office or the counseling center. They do more counseling-based therapy groups in the counseling center, but that sounds more like a support group or a special interest group. The good thing about our office is we're located right in the student union, mm-hmm. which is really convenient in terms of students being able to find us, but also being able to kind of stop by and check in and say, hey, I tell my students at the start of the semester, I want to see when things are going well too. Please stop by when it's not a crisis. That would be lovely. We do some advising like that. We also we work with career services a lot, and so especially as you're finishing your education and kind of looking for what's next, we do a lot of close work with career services, and then we also have on campus. I think it's a nationwide program because it's federal. It's called the Workforce Recruitment Program. And so that's something that we do in conjunction with career services. We have recruiters come to campus, and it's specifically for students with disabilities. And they're able to, actually it might be Skype interviews this year, I can't remember, but they're able to interview with a recruiter and
So it's federal, so
mm-hmm.
nationwide.
Yeah, we've had students go to DC, we've had students stay more locally. So basically your name goes into a data bank with the ratings of the recruiter in terms of like what your interests are and things like that. They have not changed. The law is still FERPA, which is the Family Education Rights and Privacy Act. But what we do at the start of the year, especially for first year students, is we have them sign permission for us to be able to speak with their parents.
Okay,
and and so that's what we do is, especially for first year students, it's pretty important. And so sometimes it's funny because I have some adult students too who are probably in their 40s and 50s, and they're like, really? You want me to sign away permission for my parents and guardians? I'm like, no, that's for my 17-year-olds, you're fine. But we have a pretty wide range of students on campus, and so sometimes what I hear from my older students is kind of more tailored towards the younger students. They get a little frustrated with the 18-year-olds in their big lectures, but generally, and I think at enrollment services, there's a way for a student to sign away their FERPA rights. And in instances like that, it makes a lot of sense, especially when you're paying the bills, you kind of want to. We see parents lots before we see students, actually. During orientation, we don't have time set aside to see students during family orientation in June. We have time set aside to see parents because students, they are not thinking about what their disability is going to be like in September. They are thinking about where they're going to be living, who's that hot guy over there, who's that cool looking girl over there. They're not they're barely ready to think about classes. And so we really spend a lot of time talking to parents about the conversations that they might be having with their student as the summer kind of dwindles down and as their students preparing to come away to school. But we do, and I think I have coming from a school psychology background and sitting in on the meetings where parents have had to fight school systems to get their students accommodations and have had to really strongly advocate for their children to get what they need educationally. I'm quite sympathetic to the fact that that's been your primary role, and it might be hard to trust that your child's going to A, follow up on things, and B, be able to do that successfully. And so I tend to have a soft spot for moms. It's usually moms, not the dads aren't involved. But we do. I mean, absolutely. Parents shouldn't be calling professors. That's not going to end well for your student if you're calling professors. And I've had to explain that to parents before, which is always a little bit shocking. But we can call professors, certainly. And so we hear a lot from our students, you know, if something happens where they feel like their professor didn't accommodate them the way they need to be accommodated, or if they feel, we had one professor say, okay, now everyone with a disability line up at the door for your extra time. Like, that's terrible. Right. And so we do a lot of re-education.
It's terrible.
And it was like a perfectly well-intentioned person. But we just do a lot of re-education on campus about, like, these are the things that you should maybe think about doing differently. But certainly that's something, we have a lot of students. And we work to foster relationships with our students. Right now we have, it feels like a lot of people, but I'm only half-time this year, but we have 5 people in disability services working with 1,300 students registered with our office.
1,300 disabled?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
So, but those aren't students who come in every semester. Those are students who are still enrolled and have registered with our office. Sometimes what I see is we see a lot of freshmen and sophomores. We have a lot of students who need a lot of support their first couple of years. And then by the time they're juniors and seniors, maybe their classes are different, maybe they're doing more internship or experiential work. We see a lot less of our juniors and seniors than our freshmen and sophomores, which sometimes is hurtful because you get close to these students, but I think means we did a good job and means that things worked out the way they need to do and they can, you know, take things from there. And that's all part of kind of the development process. So. They're all provided to students under the ADA and Section 504 of the Rehab Act, which doesn't discriminate in terms of type of program or any of those things. And so if you have the documentation to support the accommodations, we can accommodate you. We have health services, which is, I think, just got registered as its own health clinic. And there's also a walk-in clinic apparently in the Emporium, which I just found out about recently. Can you imagine? I had no idea. We just got a flyer the other day. I was like, I had no. Well, and the big news is they're open later than health services and they're open on the weekends. But I just got a flyer last week. But health services does have doctors and nurses and PTs, and they have rotating specialists come in, and so they don't always have like orthopedic people on staff, but they'll have like Thursday morning hours or something like that. Well, we have health services, and then we also have a doctor of physical therapy program on campus, and so there's a clinic in Independence Square where students can get physical therapy work done as well. I think 2 right now. One of the counselors, actually she's an advisor who works in academic advising, but she has therapy dog hours in one of the residence halls in one of the social rooms of residence halls, and so there's time set aside every week for students to be able to come hang out with a therapy dog. And then they have up the hours during final exams time in December and then again in April, so students can spend time. So we're seeing an increase in requests for emotional support animals living in the residence halls, and so that's the new type of animal we're considering for campus. So a service dog is a service dog who's been trained to do things, and so they are universally permitted on campus. But an emotional support animal is just an animal which provides someone comfort, and so it does not need any special skills other than being comforting to that individual. But it could be an iguana, it could be a rat, it could be a snake, which might be discomforting to someone else, which is kind of what we're running into in terms of our policy making, is that how can I support your comfort rat when your next door neighbor is terrified of rodents, as am I. So that's kind of what that's what we're running into this year. Well, legally, we're only allowed to ask 2 questions. So legally, service animals are dogs or miniature horses. Those are the only 2 animals that qualify as service animals. We're allowed to ask, is that a service dog? And we're also allowed to ask, what task has that dog been trained to do for you? But that task might be comfort me or alert me if I'm gonna have a panic attack. That task can be a little bit ambiguous. So we haven't been running into a lot of them. We did last year or the year before have a service puppy in training living in graduate housing that was allowed by Housing and Residential Life, that ate through all the baseboards, that was terribly poorly behaved. No, so it's the puppy socialization part before the dog moves on to learning specific tasks for a person. There's a socialization training period of time. So the dog was in the socialization.
So somebody
period.
just
Housing and Residential Life was, because there was something in Rhode Island state law about service dogs in training being treated as service dogs, which I understand. You know, they need to learn how to act appropriately in the lecture hall and all of the other places where their person might be taking them. So I did have a question at the beginning of the summer. I haven't heard back, so I think he's not on campus. I haven't seen him either, from a student who needed a service Great Dane. for stability, mobility purposes, which makes sense because they're so large. But she was going to move them into a sorority house. So, and then the other piece we just met about the service animal issue the other day is, is it ethical to keep an emotional support animal needs to stay in the residence hall room? Is it ethical to keep an animal confined into a dorm room 24 hours a day, 7 days a week? How can you be sure they're being treated appropriately? How can you be sure they're not being neglected or starved or cared for the right way? So, so these are all the new things that we're dealing with. I'd be more okay with a monkey than a rat. I was really, really nervous about the rat request we had. Actually, the rat just got moved in, and then housing called me and said, there's a rat in the door. No, I was unaware. So my job is never, ever boring. Is the greatest part about my job. There's always something new. There's always new people to come see me, new challenges to deal with. So, well, in terms of mobility, certainly the accessibility of the campus. And so University of Rhode Island's campus isn't inherently terribly accessible because of our large hill and the winters and things like that. But the way we work around that is by having our van available to students for classes. And so it's not available on the weekends or after like 5 or 6 at night. And so in terms of getting to the dining halls and things like that, students are on their own. We'll work with them to live as close to the dining halls as possible to make sure that they can access that. So that would be my number one for mobility, would be the accessibility of the buildings and the campus itself. And then the other piece in terms of, migraine headaches or, if you have a flare-up of pain or things like that, would just be flexibility in terms of being able to reschedule exams and assignments and make sure that you're not going to be dinged for that in terms of your course grade. Because my goal is for my students to be judged on what they know and what they've worked to learn in the class, and not necessarily their disability impacting them. So if they're not able to make it to an exam, but they've worked for 2 weeks to study for that exam, I want to make sure that they're able to take that exam and take it for full credit. So, and the big piece is what we do is we meet with our students every semester and write them letters with these accommodations in the letters, and the student then goes and meets with the professors and talks about, if I'm sick, if I can't come to school, this is our plan. So if I can't make it to your exam, I'll email you as soon as I know. I'll reschedule for a time that's convenient for both of us. But it's really on the student to kind of communicate with their professors and advocate and let them know kind of what's going on. We are a federally funded institution and we follow federal laws. That's how we handle it right at this moment. I certainly understand from many people that medical marijuana is a great tool and a great pain reliever. But right now, with federal laws, we would lose federal funding. And so that's the RIEDS line at the moment. The RIEDS aren't necessarily going after people who are drinking or using drugs. It's the people who have like 8 people in their dorm room and are being really loud. Those are the people who get caught for alcohol infractions and things like that. But for the time being, we're following. Well, we have to follow federal laws because we have funding contingent on those federal laws. So. We do help, in terms of the employment piece with career services. In terms of federal loans, we work, usually I would send them to financial aid to learn about either consolidating or deferring or what those best options might be. I'm not the financial aid gal on campus, only because I have, probably 350 students on my caseload. Every single one of them has a different financial aid situation. It's kind of like Tetris, getting all of the funding fitted together. So we do help with that. We have at URI, we have a nutritionist that works half-time for health services and half-time for dining services. Mm-hmm. And so she sends out bi-weekly menus for students with, I think the top ones are gluten, eggs, dairy, soy, and peanuts or nuts. So she sends out bi-weekly meetings or menus for the students with the things that will be safe for them to eat. Mm-hmm. We do sometimes, I have one student who's allergic to 75 things, and just there was no way she was going to be able to get the nutrition she needed from our dining plans, and so we did get her off the campus dining plan and access to a kitchen. And so we do sometimes, in very extreme cases, help students get themselves off the campus dining plan if it's just not possible for them to get what they need. Celiac, I think she should be able to. Our nutritionist is awesome. She's gone and gotten like soy-free cream cheese, vegan, you know what I mean? She's gone and put those things on the salad bar and on, made those available for students. And so, so if there is a nutritionist there, someone she can work with like that, that's where.
Do you guys do any kind of advocacy training, like, kind of teaching the kids how to advocate for themselves?
We do it kind of a one-on-one way. And so, because every student comes in at a different level. Some students come in and they can explain, like, these are the 17 things that I have a hard time with, these are the 55 things I'm great at, you know, and these are the accommodations that work for me. And those students are great, and you can say, okay, here you go. But it's really the students who come in and say, I don't know what my disability is. I don't know what accommodations I've had that I can still have in college. So those are the students that we work with. And we have, at the moment, 3 school psychologists on staff. And so for learning disabilities, we're pretty well versed in what that testing looks like and helping students kind of work through their testing and understand what their strengths and weaknesses are and what that might mean for them at the college level. So some students, it's pretty intensive what they need coming in. So the self-advocacy piece is huge. That was like the #1 finding from my dissertation. The self-advocacy is the #1 link to, you know, emotional satisfaction on campus and grades and GPA and those sorts of things. We get all sorts of questions. So certainly we have some loaner wheelchairs that we could probably use in a pinch. So we had a group on campus for a conference a couple of years ago. They donated one, so now we have 3. So but oftentimes for tours and things like that, admissions will need to borrow those. Thank you all so much. I have a couple handouts I brought. One kind of looking at the differences between high school and college, legally, class-wise and things. And then I have another kind of checklist about what to do as you transition.
Could we get a copy of your dissertation?
If you want to read it.
It's about disability of college students, right?
So it's so I looked at students transitioning from high school to college. So I had 90 participants who had an IEP or a 504 in high school and then came into college, and then I had another 100 participants who just came into college without those supports in high school. So, but I looked at kind
I
of
would
adjustment,
love
all those sorts
to
of
read
things.
it. If you could email me a copy.
Sure. I think it's in the public domain now. It was published. I got the.
Congratulations. And one other question, do you have any of your professors, do they do video classes, so like that if a student is too ill to make it to class that day, they can still tune in to the lecture?
Some of them do.
Some of them do? Okay.
What we're running into now is universal design of those courses, and so sometimes legally, if something goes up online as a course, it needs to be visually and auditorily accessible. Should be. And so transcribing those or having captions and things like that can be difficult. But not everyone's following the law. One of our psych professors does everything online. She has the PowerPoints with her voice behind them. So.
Anything else? Thank you so much.
Thanks.